Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Prynawn da. Croeso, welcome to the first professional learning event for the new GCSE in physical education and health. I suppose the first thing I'll say is that, it's exciting times. This qualification has been co-constructed with schools, wider stakeholders, governing bodies, Sport Wales, regulators, colleges, to get to where we are today. And so I'll do a couple of introductions. First of all, Emma Baldwin in the beautiful ski lodge type background. Emma is the subject support officer, which is the engine room behind everything that we do, and your first port of call usually. Then Sarah Dickinson, who's going to take us through this evening. Sarah is the subject advisor for physical education and is the brains of the outfit. And then that just leaves me. For the people that don't know, I'm Sean Williams, the subject officer for physical education qualifications. So I will hand over to Sarah. If you do have any questions, I'm sure Sarah will say this, but do post those questions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can this evening. But I know that there was already questions that were posted prior to the event, and I know that Sarah's done her utmost to get those answered. So enjoy the evening, and please feel free to ask any questions, and just be mindful this is the first event of many events that are taking place over the next few months. So I'll hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the WJEC Physical Education and Health New Specification briefing. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So as Sean said, my name is Sarah Dickinson. I'm the subject advisor, and thanks to Sean and Emma, who are working in the background for us today. I'll just go through a quick bit of housekeeping before we start this afternoon's presentation. We're required to make an audio recording of today's event. This is to ensure that the WJEC is able to demonstrate compliance with the regulatory conditions of recognition. Let's also just remind you that you are not permitted to make your own audio or video recording of any aspect of today's event. The recording will be published on the new PE and Health qualification page after the Welsh event next week, so you should be able to refer back to it as you need to. You should have already received some pre-event material for today's event, including the agenda and the new specification. You will also receive a copy of today's presentation after this event closes. There is a pre-collated question and answer session later on in the presentation. And as Sean said, should you have any additional questions as we go through, then these can be posted in the Ask a Question facility available on your screen. And Sean and Emma will be busy working in the background to answer them for you. So the purpose of today is to share with you the new specification and to highlight any comparisons and major differences in the current specification and to answer any important questions that may arise. Tonight will not be focused on teaching and learning or assessment, as these professional learning events feature later in the academic year and into the next. Tonight will purely be about the specifics of the specification and ensuring that we have all interpreted it and understand it correctly to avoid any major misconceptions. The format of this evening will include an introduction to the new GCSE and a specific breakdown of Unit 1, the digital examination, and Unit 2, the non-examination assessment, or the NEA. I will also be signposting where you can access further support and future professional learning opportunities and addressing any questions towards the end of the session. So just a little introduction to the qualification itself. One of the first things you might notice is the name change from the current GCSE in physical education to the new GCSE in physical education and health. We are a Wave 2 subject, and this is predominantly due to the amount of change compared with the current GCSE in PE. It is in fact one of the only existing subjects with a name change in the current reform of GCSEs. This new qualification has been subject to considerable consultation throughout its development, in line with Qualification Wales's rigorous approval criteria. We would like to thank teachers, specifically yourselves, for your feedback and positive contributions throughout this process, which has led to some positive change in the approval criteria for our subject. So before we get into the specifics of the new units, this might be a good opportunity to highlight some important aspects of the new spec, which may help you to understand and appreciate its context behind the new qualification. The specification outlines how this new qualification supports the curriculum for Wales. The qualification is underpinned by the Curriculum for Wales framework to ensure that learners can continue to make progress towards the four purposes. Central to its design are the principles of progression, along with the statements of what matters and those subject-specific skills outlined in the Designing Your Curriculum section of the Health and Wellbeing area of Learning and Experiences. This ensures an effective continuum of learning and progression into the 14 to 16 phase. The links to the statements of what matters and the principles of progression are available for you here. Just to make you aware, there is also a specification walkthrough resource already available on the Open website on the new Physical Education and Health qualification page. This is a short blended learning module designed to be read alongside the new specification to help teachers understand the detail of the units, the content, the assessment objectives, and the assessment format. It can be accessed on the Open website underneath the Training tab and on-demand courses. You will need to register to gain access to the course, but this is a free resource and it is available for all now. I would just like to highlight that in the specification has two important appendices that you will need to refer to when planning your schemes of work and qualification delivery. The first, which I'm sure you're all quite familiar with, is the approved list of sports and physical activities. This is a comprehensive list with some new additions from the current specification. It is important to familiarise yourselves with the new list and remember that only activities on this approved list can be offered by candidates to ensure that the combination of activities is permitted. There will be a crossover time when you are delivering the old specification, which will eventually be called the legacy, with Year 11s, and the new specification with Year 10s. So it is vital that you refer to the correct list for the right cohort. And although there are additional supports on this new qualification, such as skateboarding, shooting, and lawn bowls, you can be assessed on the old specification. So please do be careful over the next couple of years. The second appendix in the specification, Appendix B, highlights opportunities to embed elements of the curriculum for Wales. This is a useful tool for planning and mapping cross-curricular links and should also be considered when planning schemes of work and delivery. As we go through this evening, I will refer to something called the SAMs. This is the sample assessment material, which will also be available to support the new specification. These are currently in the final stages of development and due to be published on 17th of December, both in English and Welsh. For Unit 1, this will include a link to the new online examination in its digital format and also an accompanying paper version and mark scheme. It is important to remember here that the SAMs has also been produced in paper format to support teachers' planning and delivery. However, the live examination for candidates will only be provided as an online digital version. For Unit 2, the SAMs will contain information for teachers on how to manage the arrangements for assessment. This will include the mark record sheets, PE1, PE2, and you will notice here a new PE3-4, and also a detailed breakdown of each task, the conditions, the assessment criteria, and the declaration forms for candidates. So while as the SAMs available for teachers, there will also be guidance for teaching documents produced to support the delivery of both Unit 1 and Unit 2. The guidance for teaching offers content amplification and example tasks for each area of the specification. It will serve as a useful tool when planning your delivery and provide teachers with an idea of the depth required throughout the specification. This will also be available on the Open website from January the 22nd, 2026. In addition to the guidance for teaching produced for Unit 1 and Unit 2, there will also be a document to supplement the approved list of sports and physical activities. This will include guidance on how to prepare learners for Unit 2 assessment. This will set out the expectations and context for all of the 50 performance activities in grid format, the optional coaching element, and also the personal training activity. It breaks down the requirements for the specification and provides real examples of where the marks could be seen and awarded. This document will also be available on the qualification page on the Open website and should hopefully be placed next to the specification for you to find easily. So as you can now see, there are several resources already available or in production to help support the delivery of this new GCSE in PE and health qualification. So we're now going to move on to look at the new qualification in greater detail. You will see that the structure of the qualification, including how it should be assessed, is regulator, which is Qualification Wales's approval criteria, which can be referenced in the link shown on the screen. As for the current qualification, this new qualification is linear, which means that all assessments will take place or be submitted at the end of the course. It also means that there is no hierarchy to the order the unit should be taught. It is not a tiered qualification, so all candidates will sit the same assessments, and the qualification will be first awarded in the summer of 2028. You will see from the qualification overview on the left that the qualification is now split 60-40. 40% for Unit 1, which is a digital examination, which is 1 hour, 30 minutes long. It is worth 80 marks and is marked by the WJEC. Then we have 60% for Unit 2, which is the non-examination assessment, or NEA. This is the internally assessed and externally moderated unit by a WJEC visiting moderator. It is worth 120 marks and has 3 components: performance and coaching, and personal training. So as we look at this straight away, we can clearly see the difference between the old specification, which was 50-50, to the new specification, which is 60% NEA and 40% digital examination. I know some people have queried whether this new GCSE is becoming easier and as a result less academic with a greater NEA theory split. I think in fact GCSE has always been one of the toughest GCSEs for our candidates. Top-level sports people specialise, and certainly by this age most candidates have focused in on less rather than more sports. We have always asked our candidates to be masters of 3 sports, write a written piece of coursework, and have theory knowledge across 5 topic areas: health and fitness, anatomy, exercise physiology, skill app, and sport in society. These changes simply bring it into line with other subjects and allow our candidates to thrive in the subject they have chosen. When looking a little more closely at the unit breakdown, you can see that Unit 1 is called the Principles of Physical Education and Health. It is made up of 3 components, or I suppose traditional topic areas. 1.1 are the factors that affect health and well-being, sports and physical activity. 1.2 are the physiological processes for health and sports performance. And 1.3 are the psychological aspects of sport and physical activity. And as previously mentioned, Unit 2 is the non-examination assessment. It's called Performance and Personal Training. It's made up of also 3 components: performance, coaching, and personal training. As with the previous specification, the new specification also sets out its assessment objectives and weightings. Assessment Objective 1, which you will have often been called AO1, is where learners must demonstrate knowledge and understanding. 2 is where learners must apply this knowledge and understanding, so some element of application. 3 is where learners must analyse and evaluate. And AO4, which we historically know as the doing part in PE, is where learners must demonstrate and apply relevant skills and techniques in sport and physical education activities. Also included here are the weightings for each assessment objective across Unit 1, Unit 2, and then the overall weighting of the qualification. As previously mentioned, Unit 1 totals 40%, and all of those marks come from AO1, AO2, and AO3 questions, and AO2 totals 60%, with the marks awarded particularly from AO4 and some AO3. It is vital here that both teachers and learners are aware of these assessment objectives and their context within the wider qualification. As well as the assessment objectives within the specification, there are 4 stems that dictate the depth of learning required from students. As teachers, it is vital that you're aware of each stem to ensure the correct amplification of the specification. Learners should know is used when learners are required to demonstrate basic knowledge and understanding. So, for example, direct recall, often AO1. Learners should understand is used when learners are required to demonstrate greater depth of knowledge and understanding, application of knowledge to context, and evaluation and analysis of information. Learners should be able to is used when learners need to apply their knowledge and understanding, analysis and evaluation to a practical situation, or demonstrate application of practical skills and techniques. And finally, learners should be aware of is used when learners need a basic knowledge of the specified content, and this does not need to be taught in great detail. This is where the teacher needs the guidance for teaching path to determine the level of depth required for the topic. So before we move into the individual units, I think it's important here to summarise some of the major changes from the previous specification, so teachers and learners are clear on the expectation of this new GCSE in physical education and health. So for Unit 1, the weighting of the marks has now changed. It is now worth 40%, a 10% decrease from the previous qualification where it was worth 50%. Unit 1 is now a digital examination only, and not a written examination as previously. This will be in the format of an on-screen exam, and there will be no option to complete this paper. Unit 1 is now worth 80 marks, which differs from the current specification, where it's worth 100 marks. And finally, it is now a 1 hour, 30-minute long exam and not 2 hours as previously. These are important changes to consider when planning your scheme of work and delivery to account for the fact that Unit 1 is now worth 40% of the overall qualification and not 50% as it was previously. Also summarising some important changes for Unit 2. The weighting of the marks is now changed and is increased from 50% from the previous qualification to 60% on this new GCSE in PE and health. It is now worth 120 marks, not 100 as previously, and it's now made up of 3 parts: performance or coaching, and a personal training activity. It is important to point out that any sport or physical activity from the approved list can now be chosen, and there is no stipulation for candidates to include a team and an individual sport or physical activity within their choices. And to move on now and to look more closely at Unit 1, the digital examination in greater detail. As previously mentioned, the examination will be 1 hour and 30 minutes and available as on-screen only, and this decision was part of the QW approval criteria and not made at subject level. There are 3 topics as part of the theory element of the course. Topic 1, otherwise known as 1.1, are the factors that affect health and well-being, sports and physical activity. And this is where learners will gain knowledge and understanding of how sport and physical activity impact health and well-being, and also the socio-cultural areas and factors that influence participation and performance. Topic 2, 1.2, is the physiological processes for health and sports performance. This is where learners will gain knowledge and understanding of diet and nutrition, the short and long-term effects of exercise, movement in physical activity and sport, energy systems and training zones. And topic 3, 1.3, is the psychological aspects of sport and physical activity. And this is where learners will gain knowledge and understanding of self-confidence, motivation, arousal, stress, and anxiety, and feedback. It is important to point out here that this new Unit 1 now consists of 3 topic areas, which is a reduction from the current spec where there are 5 topics in Unit 1. There are also some new topics and areas of study, such as arousal, stress and anxiety, which is later at A-level. So that this will help to bridge the gap between GCSE and A-level, will help pupils to gain a wider knowledge and understanding in the very important topics to not only enhance their theory knowledge, but deal with these pressures in a practical context too. Hopefully our learners will benefit from studying these exciting new topics earlier. So we now have 3 topics: health and well-being and social cultural, physiology and psychology. It is also important to note here that some of the previous Unit 1 areas of content, such as components of fitness, methods of training, warming up and cooling down, etc., are still in the specification, but they've now actually moved and appear in Unit 2 instead of Unit 1. So much of the exam remains very familiar to both teachers and candidates. And although some content has reduced and changed, some has just been reformatted into other areas of the course and will still need to be formally taught. As previously highlighted, this Unit 1 will be a digital-only examination. Although this might be a new style of examination for your learners, e-assessments allow learners to complete their exam in the normal way of working, and there are many positives to take. It enables all learners to submit a clear and legible script where handwriting can often be an issue for both candidates and examiners. The colour, font size and background can be changed to assist learners with varying needs. Any learners that are entitled to extra time, this can be automatically added to the digital time clock at the top of the screen, which counts down the time left available for learners. Learners can move across the paper as they would a traditional paper, and they can flag any questions they have not attempted to enable them to come to them. The answer boxes grow as the learner writes, and this is sometimes off-putting to learners who can get disheartened when they see a full empty page of lines. And this also allows our better learners to write more as they are not restricted by space. The paper is more interactive, with drag and drop and match and pair answers, as well as traditional written answers. And it is hoped that this new method will be more current for our learners. The SAMs, as previously mentioned, will enable both teachers and learners to visually see the on-screen exam format. This is available from December the 17th, so there will be plenty of time available to navigate this prior to the start of the course in September 2026. You will be able to view the examination exactly the way the students will, and you will be able to navigate through as you would a normal exam paper fully from start to finish. This will give teachers and learners the opportunity to try out its functionality and get a feel for the format. It also provides opportunity to see the style of exam questions and identify the assessment objectives within them. As previously mentioned, the SAMs will be available in paper format, for the actual exam for the pupils when the course starts will only be available in the online version. So although much of the context remains similar to the previous specification, although somewhat rejigged and adapted, the online exam will obviously look very different to our learners. So how will this actually look to them? There will be an opportunity to look at the digital exam in greater detail in the spring face-to-face CPD. However, it is good to show you some screenshots today and highlight the different styles of questions that learners will encounter. These are much more interactive and include lists where learners will be required to choose from a drop-down menu, match in pairs where pupils will be required to match up statements or scenarios to a description or explanation, written response questions where candidates will be required to answer within a set text box, drag and drop questions where candidates will be required to drag their chosen answers into an allocated area, visual clips that you will all be familiar with from the current specification, directly relating to the information seen in the clip. And lastly, traditional band mark questions with candidates required to write an extended response in a set text area. The sample assessment material will prove hugely beneficial to both teachers and learners, and you should be able to work through these styles of questions to support your delivery. So to conclude with Unit 1, we are looking at 40%, a 1 hour, 30 minutes on-screen examination worth 80 marks. There are 3 topic areas of study, including questions from AO1, AO2 and AO3. And there is some new content and some content has been moved to the Unit 2. Okay. I'm now going to move to go through the Unit 2 non-examination assessed unit in greater detail. To recap, this unit is worth 6% of the overall qualification, which is 120 marks, which are evenly split between 3 areas. It will be assessed by a practical NEA, and this will take the form of a moderation day, similar to the format used in the current qualification and based in individual centres. This unit must be taken in the final year of the course, and there are 3 parts to this assessment. Candidates will be required to perform in 1 sport or physical activity from the approved list, and this will be worth 20% of the qualification. They will also be asked to either perform in a second sport or physical activity, provide coaching in a sport or physical activity from the approved list, and this will also be worth 20% of the qualification. Lastly, learners will be required to plan, implement and evaluate a personal training activity of themselves over an 8 to 10 week period for a sport or physical activity from the approved list. And this will be the final 20% to make it the 60% of the NEA. This is different from the current qualification, where we currently assess pupils in 3 practical activities and a written piece of coursework. Now learners could either perform in 1 sport, perform or coach in a second sport, and they must also plan, implement and evaluate a training programme. As touched on earlier, this can only be a positive change for our students. We often use the analogy of GCSE music, where we do not ask candidates to play the piano beautifully at a high level, to also be able to master the flute or the trumpet, for example, specialise in their chosen instrument. This new specification allows candidates to be seen at their very best and not have to go looking for that elusive 3rd sport that we all try and look around for in time for moderation day. However, there is still scope to maintain the breadth of activities if that suits candidates better. So you could have 1 student choose rugby performance, football performance, and then, for example, do their personal training activity also in rugby. So they could be completely based on team sports. Or they could choose, for example, rugby performance and rugby coaching and rugby personal training activity. So they could completely specialise really in 1 sport. Or they could choose 3 completely different sport or physical activities from the approved list. And they could, for example, do performance in rugby, football coaching, and then, for example, maybe do their personal training in swimming. So as you can see, there are no longer stipulations on the 3 components, and there are multiple NEA pathways to suit all learners. Either way, assessment must be completed by the centre and moderated by the WJEC visiting moderator on moderation day. All activities must be assessed by teachers, and the mark sheets also signed by the teachers. As previously, appropriate audio-visual evidence must be available for the performance of any off-site activities. So let's take a closer look at the performance. Pupils are required to perform in 1 sport or physical activity from the approved list, and then should they choose, they can perform in a second sport or physical activity if they choose not to coach. You will also notice, as mentioned earlier, there's no longer any stipulation to include a team or an individual sport. The sports and activities must come from the approved list. One of the most important things to note for Unit 2 is that we now have a full specification and not just assessment criteria with which to award pupils marks. This Unit 2 specification now clearly dictates exactly what learners must be taught. There is a clear distinction between teaching and learning and assessment here. Therefore, it is imperative that students are taught and gain skills, knowledge and understanding following areas of performance: preparation, skills and techniques, decision-making, rules and requirements, and analysis and evaluation. These are expanded on further in the specification. Therefore, although assessment must occur in the full competitive context, as it does currently, there is a requirement that teaching and learning is broken down to provide pupils with an opportunity to gain skills, knowledge and understanding in their chosen areas of performance. It is also important to consider how this might shape your new scheme of work and how you will incorporate practical teaching lessons and not just potential assessment lessons. As far as the controls go for performance in a sport or physical activity must be assessed in the full and competitive context. Collaboration is permitted during the activity. This means that the pupils can work together in a practical context, although the assessment will be on an individual basis. For the second strand of the NEA, pupils must either perform in a sport or have to provide coaching, sport or physical activity. Learners who select coaching for Part 2 can be assessed in the same or different sport or physical activity to that they selected for Part 1. So this allows learners, as I mentioned earlier, to either specialise further in one sport or to conduct across 2 performance sports if they wish to. As far as the controls go here, no collaboration is permitted during the coaching option. This means that coaches can communicate and give instructions to the participants during their sessions. However, the coach should work independently to develop and deliver their own coaching session. Again, to note here, there is a specification that stipulates what skills learners must be taught. It is also imperative that if the learner chooses to provide coaching in a sport and activity from the approved list, they are taught and gain skills, knowledge and understanding in the following components. These components are the same as the performance components, so preparation, skills, techniques, decision-making, rules and requirements, and analysis and evaluation. And as you look at the specification, you will see they are broken down to be specific to a coach rather than a performer. Therefore, in a similar way that performance is delivered, coaching must be delivered in a way that gives students the opportunity to develop their skills, knowledge, and understanding. I would imagine that most learners will have the capacity to opt for 2 performance options, competing regularly in 2 sports. This could be only 2 sports from the approved list, so netball and hockey, for example, athletics and swimming, any combination as long as they are permitted on the list. Although coaching would certainly benefit some learners who compete in one sport at a very high and a time-consuming level. For example, thinking of the gymnasts and the swimmers who train sometimes 20+ hours a week, they can perform and coach in that same sport and actually get better marks. Equally, learners can also coach in a sport they do not perform in if they choose to do so. It is important to consider how this might look in your schemes of work for multiple students across multiple sports should they wish to consider coaching. The third area of the NEA is the personal training activity. For Part 3, learners can be assessed in the same or different sport or activity that's selected from Part 1 or Part 2. So the learners could do a personal training activity in the same sport that they have already chosen for performance or coaching, and they can really specialise in one activity, or they could choose a different activity if they wanted to opt for breadth and depth. It must be noted that the personal training activity must be as a practical performer and is not permitted through the avenue as a coach. This is now where pupils are required to plan, implement and evaluate a personal training programme of themselves. This was a very welcome change to the approval criteria after the last consultation, as the initial criteria wanted pupils to perform PT sessions on other learners. Obviously, this came with many health and safety concerns for PE teachers at this age, and we were thrilled that QW moved to personal training of self for learners. So thank you again for taking the time to focus and address this positive change with us. Again, as with the performance and coaching, the specification also stipulates what is required to be taught as part of the personal training activity. The specification states that learners will gain skills, knowledge and understanding in the following areas: self-assessment, developing and implementing a training programme, and analysis and evaluation. Now, although at first glance this appears very similar to the current PFP in GCSE PE, the end product is quite different. The specification dictates what must be delivered for the personal training activity. Learners must plan, implement and evaluate a personal training programme period 8 to 10 weeks. This will be moderated on Moderation Day alongside performance and coaching activity. In the SAMs here on the screen, which is due for publication in December, you will see that within the context of personal training, learners must complete the following tasks. There are now 3 tasks. Task 1 requires learners to complete an initial self-assessment of performance and identify the purpose for the personal training activity based on their strengths and weaknesses, similar to the assessment package that we would have had at the start of the PFP. The evidence for this is the unprescribed format, so learners can either choose to do this in a written form, similar to how they did in the PFP, or you can choose audio, visual or audio-visual means. So in the current modern world, some pupils might prefer to prepare maybe a mini vlog to access the marks for task 1, rather than simply write their assessments. Task 2 is a practical application, so the actual doing. And this does not need to be written as the previous PFP was. Instead, learners will need to gather audio-visual recordings and evidence at 3 points throughout their programme. Task 2A requires learners to plan and monitor progress, including the identification of appropriate strategies for their programme and appropriate monitoring of training and progress. Task 2B requires learners to implement these strategies for improvement, including focusing in on the principles of training, the components of fitness, the methods of training, and the training zones in which they will work. You will notice here, this is where the old Unit 1 content comes into play again, and this must be taught to pupils to enable them to access this area of the specification. Task 3 is then where learners are required to evaluate the impact of the strategies for improvement on performance. So they are evaluating the impact of their training programme. And similar evidence is required here as in task 1, which it means it can either be in a written or an audio-visual format. This is obviously very different to the previous fully written evidence PFP NEA. Now it is hoped that the effort will be focused on the doing, the practical application and the engagement, rather than the time spent writing. Pupils can of course keep their own written training plans as personal logs, but these will not be needed for assessment purposes. With this in mind, it is important to keep remembering the distinction between teaching and learning and assessment. And we will spend more time looking at this in the face-to-face CPD in the spring term. So to summarise, the personal training activity includes self-assessment, planning, monitoring and implementing a training programme, and then evaluating that training programme and its impact on overall performance. Now, teacher observation must be in place to ensure the authenticity of this evidence produced for the summative assessment. This should be done at regular intervals during the personal training activity. Authentication of work must consist of audio-visual recordings, so evidence at 3 points during task 2. No collaboration is permitted during the personal training elements, which means learners must independently plan, implement and analyse their personal training activity. So there is quite a lot of change here to Unit 2. So we have a whole new specification for teaching for the first time. We have some new content, some of which has moved over from the previous Unit 1. Now we have a maximum of 2 performance activities, all 1 performance and 1 coaching activity. And there is a change to the personal training activity, which is now not a fully written document. All of this is worth 60% of the overall qualification, which is 20% for each component. There are many variables now to consider, including staffing, available facilities in your school, the context of teaching a new Unit 2 specification, and it would be wise to discuss these pertinent issues as a department prior to the face-to-face CPD in the spring term. We appreciate there's a lot to take in this evening and many changes to consider in your schemes of work prior to delivery. Hopefully you have a greater understanding of the specification requirements with which you continue to build upon, ready to start the qualification in September 2026. I'm going to quickly signpost some of these resources and where you can find them before we move on to some question and answers. So we are currently producing new digital resources for Unit 1. This will involve a blended learning module and knowledge organisers for all 3 topic areas from Unit 1, and these will be available on the Open website. There are also option evenings flyers already available both in English and Welsh on the website already, ready for your option evenings with learners and parents. I've already mentioned the specification walkthrough that is available on the Open website, the guidance for teaching, which will become live in January 2026. And then let's not forget Portal, which will still hold all the previous past paper questions from the Unit 1 content. So much of the content is still very similar, and Unit 2 example as a best practice, even if in the end the assessment looks different, you can get an idea of best practice and what to produce. We also have the SAMs for Unit 1 and Unit 2, which is coming out in December, and then the approved list available on the Open website, which will be next to the specification. Just to signpost some of the future professional learning dates that are due over the next year. So as already mentioned, the option evening flyer is already on the website, as is the specification website. The SAMs we know is available in December, and the guidance for teaching in January. Then we have the Preparing to Teach CPD, which is the face-to-face CPD available for all teachers for Wave 2. We will go through the SAMs, the guidance for teaching, approaching to teaching and learning, the availability of resources. So that really is focusing in on teaching and learning. Later on in the year, in the autumn of 2026, they will be preparing to assess online professional learning events, and they will be there to support the marking of the NEA. There will also be available exam walkthroughs and any NEA walkthroughs, which you will be familiar with the current qualification. And then, as I mentioned, the new digital resources, blended learning modules, which will be available in the spring term. So the next important step for us is preparing to teach face-to-face. And this is where we will look much more closely at strategies for teaching and learning for the new specification. All of the details are already with the head teacher. Dates, locations, times, resources, and anything you need to bring are currently being finalised and will be shared with your head of centre. There is a space reserved for every subject teacher in your school. You only need to confirm your attendance with your head teacher, as they are coordinating this county-wide event. You do not need to do anything yourself personally with the WJEC. Okay, so I'm now going to move to some question and answer session at the end of the evening. Priority has been given to the pre-submitted questions, and thank you to those who submitted those when they signed up to tonight's evening. We cannot guarantee that every extra question submitted today will be answered during the session, although Sean and Emma will try their best. All questions will then be collated into an FAQ document, disseminated and published for all teachers. So I will go through some of the questions that have been raised by centres so far. So what are the assessment objectives and weightings? I know I covered this earlier in the session, but just to remind you, the Unit 1 is now worth 40%. That is made up of 10% AO1, 20% AO2, and 40% AO3. And the Unit 2 is made up of 60%, which is 50% AO4 and 10% AO3. So our overall qualifications then worth 100%. Can candidates sit the examination on paper? No, as previously mentioned a number of times this evening, this is a digital examination only. It will use the platform called Surpass. So if you down, candidates can continue as it saves their work and it will be uploaded once the internet resolves. This was set out by the approval criteria for the regulator, Qualification Wales. And one of the most asked questions, what if my school does not have enough computers for candidates to sit an online exam? As we know, this is a digital online examination only, set out by the approval criteria from the regulator, Qualification Wales. Guidance is available on conducting digital exams and digital readiness for centres. Heads of centre and your examination officers should already be aware of this guidance and planning accordingly. The useful guidance can also be found here. Do not panic. As a PE teacher or a subject level, it is not a problem for PE teachers to concern yourselves with. The condition is endorsed by Qualification Wales, and centres will be aware and responsible for ensuring that all equipment and software is available in plenty of time for your learners. Will all new resources be available in Welsh? Yes, all of the resources to support the new qualification, so the guidance for teaching, the digital and the blended learning resources, the knowledge organisers, the option evening flyers, etc., will be available in both English and Welsh at the same time of publication. Do candidates need to pick a team and individual activity if they do two performance? No, as previously mentioned, there is no stipulation to choose a team and individual sport or activity. Candidates can select any two permitted activities from the approved list to showcase themselves in the best possible light. Can candidates now offer the same sport and activity for all areas of the NEA? So, for example, perform in football, coach in football, and complete a personal training activity in football. Yes, they can. As previously mentioned throughout this evening, candidates can offer any sport and activity from the approved list. They can also coach within that same activity due to the assessment criteria and skills being very different. And they can also do a personal training activity to improve their performance in the same sport. I think this is a great step for our learners. It gives us more flexibility to specialise, or if they choose to continue with depth and breadth to suit all learners. How do we know what candidates are expected to do for each practical sport or activity? Again, quite often asked question on the old specification and the new specification. There will be a Unit 2 guidance for teachers available, as mentioned, which signposts learning activities for students. There will also be the approved list of sports and physical activity and guidance on how to prepare learners for the assessment of Unit 2. This sets out the expectation and context for all of the 50 performance activities, coaching and the personal training. And it highlights exactly what needs to be taught. Each performance grid states the requirements of the specification and give examples what this might look like in real time for each sport and physical activity. Is the personal training the same as the PFP on the last specification? As we've already covered, no, this is not a fully written NEA. This aspect of the NEA requires candidates to demonstrate the knowledge and understanding of training and will form part of the live practical moderation day. This work is split into tasks and now marked against criteria set out in the teacher and candidate non-examination assessment handbook. Could a candidate do personal training as or for a coach? No, as also previously mentioned, personal training must be in a performance of a sport or activity, and you cannot do a personal training programme from the view of a coach. And again, one of the most commonly asked questions is how will the personal training part of the NEA be assessed and moderated? I know we've covered this in detail, but just to summarise, this is a centre marked, so an internally marked non-examination assessment, exactly as with performance and coaching, that is then externally moderated by a WJEC moderator. Teachers are required to regularly check the personal training activity at each stage. Remember, we've got tasks 1, 2 and 3, and to be able to authenticate the work as the learner's own and complete the necessary authentication documentation. The authentication of work must consist of audio-visual evidence collected at 3 points during task 2, which is the actual doing of the training programme. We have preparing to assess professional learning events which will be scheduled online in the autumn of 2026 to support the marking of this internally assessed NEA. And just a final reminder here that if task 2, so the personal training programme, is completed off-site and cannot be performed live in a centre, an audio-visual recording will be required throughout the personal training activity, a full video for teachers to assess, exactly the same way as you would do for performance and coaching. So this new personal training part of the NEA is really the opportunity to let PE students do what they do best and focus on their performance. Will the moderation days still be based in individual centres, or will it be set up as cluster moderations? As per the current arrangements, moderation days will continue to be based in individual centres. We will not be returning to cluster moderations. Okay. And that is it for me at the moment. I hope that by taking you through the specification in volumetric whistle-stop tour in greater detail has proved helpful and ironed out any initial misconceptions. It is vital that teachers continue to engage in this new GCSE as we move through to September 2026 to give our learners the best possible chance of success. There are many changes here, and although assessment will ultimately dictate the end product to which candidates need to arrive, it is clear with the new curriculum for Wales fostering independent learners, there will be roads that centres can choose to travel when designing their own GCSE scheme of work. We will all need to look at how we do things slightly differently in schools, which, although might seem challenging at the moment, it is an exciting time ahead for physical education and health. And of course, we will also have the legacy qualification running alongside to start with as well. So it is vital that teachers are as clued up as can be as they move forward. I know Sean and Emma have been working hard in the background answering any questions as they arise. So I'll hand back to Sean now to close the evening's course. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sarah. Wow, there's a lot of information there. I think just a couple of points from me really is that this is the biggest change for this qualification in most probably the last 30 years of a GCSE existing in physical education. We are the only subject, like Sarah said, that has a name change. Okay, and we've got what we wanted, and that is to award learners for being good at their practical activity. That's what we've been wanting for a long time, and not just to justify ourselves based on heavily content driven in terms of the qualification. So that's great. What we do need to unpick is the change in content that's in Unit 1. So not only is it reduced its size, there's also a significant amount of change in Unit 1 in terms of the content. And similarly, the approved list has increased its depth and breadth. But yet again, and Sarah has re-emphasised this a million times today, only the activities on that list can be offered. And yet, presently, we are inundated with calls from parents asking, can little Johnny or Julie offer an activity that's not on the list? And the PE teachers told them to phone WJEC and ask that question. It is not regulated by us. We are the ones that administer assessment of that list. That list is regulated by Qualifications Wales. In order for an activity to be added to that list, it has to go through a full consultation. And if people have been involved in the new GCSE, this started 2 years ago, and the first assessment's in another 2 years. So it's 4 years from start to finish for an activity to be added or removed from the list. Okay. Now, what I would say is that Qualifications Wales are really keen on, after the first year of assessment, that list is reviewed and it is fit for purpose. So we might have a consultation about the activities pre-2030 if we are lucky. Okay, so just be mindful of that. It is what it is. Okay, but it is exciting times. Thank you, Sarah. You have done a fantastic job to get all these documents ready for us. What I would say to people, that we always get asked about resources, and there'll be more than enough resources on the website. We don't produce textbooks anymore. There might be an organisation out there, a publisher that wants to produce a textbook, but it won't be endorsed by ourselves. And if you look at the content allows learners to apply it to themselves in their own locality, from their own experiences, and therefore it'll be quite difficult to produce something like that because it's about the learner and it's about the context of your own school. So there's lots going on there. We did have a couple of questions about, can you expand more on how we could? And the answer to that is yes, we can, but not tonight. That is for the preparing to teach bit. And then in that preparing to teach sessions that you'll be having after Christmas, we'll be looking at exactly that and not about assessment. And like Sarah said, that will be the next stage of the professional learning. Okay, so hopefully you've got a lot out of tonight. I think for me, whilst listening to Sarah, I had the spec open because it's nice to be able to put what Sarah's saying to what we're expected to teach. And the other part of that is there is content in Unit 2 and you are prepared to deliver the content in Unit 2, and that has never happened before. Okay, we've only had assessment criteria for performance or for PFPs. So we have content to deliver. So thank you. We will, I know there's a couple of questions there. I will get those done when we finish. If you have got any more questions, feel free to post them. And when we do get to the end here, there is a survey at the end. Please, when we get to slide 52, Sarah, you could put it on now, actually. Either, do your phone thing with that, or click the link, or wait till after the event. And when this is sent, uploaded, you will be able to do it. But it's important that we complete this, because without us engaging in the surveys to say whether or not we found it useful or we want any more of the same or different, we could end up not having any professional learning because we're not engaging in it. So we, WJC do take the surveys very seriously in terms of feeding back in order to make our events better for the future. Okay, so thank you, Sarah. You've done a fantastic job getting to that point. Thank you to the schools that were involved in 1, the consultation, 2, in developing the approval criteria, 3, being part of the wider picture of curriculum development, and hopefully we've got a brand new and exciting qualification that really meets the needs of our learners in physical education and health. So thank you all. Like I said, we'll be around if you want us to stay and post some more questions. The ones that are there we will answer now. And for the others, thank you. If you're still in school, safe journeys home. It was an hour, it was 2 hours we put aside, but I think you've had more than enough in 1 hour there. So without further ado, Diolch. Good luck with starting to plan this, and then we'll get to the nitty gritty of how we're going to deliver this in the new year. Okay, right, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your evening.